World of Warcraft Chronicle Volume 1, Chapter 2, Primordial Azeroth. Reign of the Elements. For many long ages, the Pantheon continued searching the cosmos for nascent titans, bringing order to countless worlds in the process. Yet despite their efforts, they did not find any more of their kin. At times, the titans of the Pantheon wondered if their search was in vain, but always they resolved to press on. They knew in their hearts that more world souls existed, and this hope filled them with purpose. Though the Pantheon did not know it, their intuition was correct. A miraculous new world was taking shape in an isolated corner of the Great Dark. Deep within this world's core, the spirit of a mighty and noble titan stirred to life. One day, it would be known as Azeroth. As the nascent titan developed, elemental spirits roamed across the world's surface. Over the ages, these beings became ever more erratic and destructive. The burgeoning world soul was so vast that it had drawn in and consumed much of the fifth element, spirit. Without this primordial force to create balance, Azeroth's elemental spirits descended into chaos. Fire, earth, air, and water. These were the forces that lorded over the infant world. They reveled in unending strife, keeping the face of Azeroth in constant elemental flux. 4 elemental lords, powerful beyond mortal comprehension, reigned supreme over innumerable lesser spirits. Of the elemental lords, none could match the ruthless cunning of 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 the Windlord. He often sent his elusive Tempest minions to spy on his enemies and sow distrust among their ranks. Using feints and ruses, he would pit the other elementals against each other, only later to unleash the full fury of his servants on his weakened foes. The winds would howl and the skies would darken with storms at his approach. As lightning blasted the world's surface, 𝒆𝒂𝒅𝒍's whirlwind elementals would come screaming from the heavens, enveloping his foes in monstrous cyclones. Compulsive and brash, the Fire Lord embraced brute force to annihilate his enemies. Wherever he went, volcanoes would burst through the world's crust, spewing forth rivers of fire and destruction. Ragnaros longed for nothing more than to boil the seas, reduce the mountains to slag, and choke the skies with ember and ash. The other elemental lords fostered a deep hatred of Ragnaros for his brazen and devastating assaults. 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍, the Stone Mother, was the most reclusive elemental ruler. Ever protective of her children, she raised towering mountain ranges to ward off her enemies' assaults. Only after they had worn themselves thin against her impenetrable fortifications would the Stone Mother emerge, wrenching open giant chasms in the earth and swallowing entire elemental armies whole. Those who survived would meet oblivion at the fists of 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍's most powerful servants, walking mountains of unforgiving crystal and stone. The wise Neptulon the Tidehunter was careful not to fall for 𝒆𝒂𝒅𝒂𝒍's schemes or to commit his minions to fruitless attacks against Tharizane's citadels. As the armies of fire, air, and earth clashed across the face of Azeroth, the Tide Hunter and his elementals would divide and conquer their rivals in brilliant routs. When his foes fled, Neptulon would crush them beneath tidal waves that dwarfed even Tharizane's highest mountain holdings. The apocalyptic battles between the elemental lords raged for untold millennia. Dominion over Azeroth constantly shifted between the factions, each one striving to remake the world in its own image. Yet for the elementals, victory was secondary to the conflict itself. To them, the world's calamitous state was sublime, and their only desire was to continue their endless cycle of chaos. Coming of the Old Gods. The elemental lords reveled amid the primordial bedlam until a group of old gods plummeted down from the Great Dark. They slammed into Azeroth's surface, embedding themselves in different locations across the world. These old gods towered over the land, mountains of flesh, pockmarked with hundreds of gnashing maws and black, unfeeling eyes. A miasma of despair soon enveloped everything that lay in their writhing shadows. Like gargantuan, cancerous pustules, the old gods spread their corruptive influence across the landscape. The lands around them seethed and withered, turning black and lifeless for leagues upon leagues. All the while, the tendrils of the old gods wormed into the world's crust, slithering deeper and deeper toward the defenseless heart of Azeroth. Organic matter seeped from the old gods' blighted forms, giving rise to two distinct races. The first were cunning and intelligent Naraki, also known as the Faceless Ones. The second were the 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍, insectoids of incredible resilience and strength. As the physical manifestations of the old gods' will, both of these races would serve their masters with a fanatical loyalty. Through their new servants, the old gods expanded the borders of their remote dominions. The Naraki acted as ruthless taskmasters, employing the 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 as laborers to erect towering citadels and temple cities around their masters' colossal bulks. The greatest of these bastions was built around Y'Shaarj, the most powerful and wicked of the old gods. This burgeoning civilization was located near the center of Azeroth's largest continent. Y'Shaarj's holdings, along with the other old god dominions, would soon spread across the world and become known as the Black Empire. The rise of the Black Empire did not go unnoticed by the elementals. Seeing the old gods as a challenge to their dominion, the elemental lords moved to excise the entities from their world. For the first time in Azeroth's history, the world's native spirits worked in unison against a common enemy. 𝒆𝒂𝒅𝒂𝒍's tempests joined with Ragnaros's fiery servants, creating monstrous cyclones of flame. These blistering firestorms raged over the world, reducing the Black Empire's citadels to ash. Elsewhere, Therazane raised jagged rock walls to corral her enemies and shatter their temple cities. Neptulon and his tidal minions then swept in, crushing the Nuraki and the 𝒌𝒄💄 between unyielding stone and the fury of the seas. Yet for all of their fervor, the elementals could not topple the Black Empire. No matter how many Nuraki and 𝒌𝒄💄 died, more and more would spawn from the old god's putrid forms like larvae from a hive. The Nuraki and the 𝒌𝒄💄 engulfed the land like an unstoppable pestilence, shattering the elementals' forms. In the end, the old gods enslaved the elementals and their lords. Without the native spirits to counter the Nuraki and the 𝒌𝒄💄, the borders of the Black Empire crept over much of the desiccated world. Perpetual twilight descended upon Azeroth, and the world spiraled into an abyss of suffering and death. The Discovery of Azeroth. Meanwhile, in the depths of the great dark beyond, Aggramar continued his quest to eradicate all signs of demonic influence. His battles led him from one world to another, from one demon-beset civilization to the next. Though Aggramar bore the full weight of his task alone, his resolve never wavered. He believed with all his heart that Sargeras would one day return and see that the Pantheon's cause was right. It was during his long and lonely journeys that Aggramar sensed something extraordinary. The tranquil dreams of a slumbering world soul, billowing across the cosmos. The song of life led him to a world that the Pantheon had not yet discovered, a world they would later name Azeroth. Nestled within the world's core was one of Aggramar's kin, one far more powerful than any they had yet encountered. The spirit was so mighty that Aggramar sensed its dreams even through the din of activity that rattled across the world's surface. Yet as Aggramar drew closer to Azeroth and beheld the world, horror seized him. Void energies shrouded the world's surface like a layer of diseased flesh. From the ruined landscape rose the old gods and their Black Empire. Miraculously, the nascent Titan's spirit remained uncorrupted, but Aggramar knew it was only a matter of time before it succumbed to the void. Aggramar sought counsel with the rest of the Pantheon, informing them of his discovery. Clearly, this was proof that Sargeras had been right about the Void Lords and their plans. Aggramar urged the other Titans to take action with all due haste before Azeroth was lost forever. Ionar was quick to champion Aggramar's cause. She compelled the other Pantheon members to think of the world's potential. If brought to maturity, this new Titan could exceed even Sargeras' considerable might, she argued. Indeed, it could become their greatest warrior, one capable of neutralizing the Void Lords once and for all. But more than that, Azeroth was one of them, a lost and vulnerable member of their family. The Pantheon could not abandon their own sibling to the clutches of the Void Lords. Ionar's words stirred the hearts of the rest of the Pantheon. They unanimously agreed to save Azeroth no matter the cost. Aggramar formulated a bold plan of attack. All members of the Pantheon would travel to Azeroth and purge the Black Empire that had claimed it. They would not, however, take action directly. Due to their colossal forms, Aggramar feared that the Pantheon would irreparably damage or even kill the World Soul. Instead, he proposed creating mighty constructs to act as the Pantheon's hands and prosecute their will against the Black Empire. Under the guidance of the great forger Sargeras, the Pantheon crafted an army of enormous servants from the crust of Azeroth itself, the 𝒆𝒅 and the Vanir. The 𝒆𝒅 were fashioned from metal, and they would command the powers of storms. The Vanir were formed from stone, and they would hold sway over the earth. Collectively, these mighty creatures would be known as the Titan Forged. The members of the Pantheon imbued a number of their servants with their specific likenesses and powers to lead the rest of the Titan Forged. These empowered beings were called the Keepers. Though they would develop their own personalities in time, they would forever after bear the mark and abilities of their makers. Aman'Thul gifted some of his vast abilities to High Keeper Ra and Keeper Odyn. Sargeras bestowed his mastery over the earth and forging to Keeper Arcadis. Golganneth granted Keepers Thorim and Hodir dominion over the storms and skies. Ionar gave Keeper Freya command over Azeroth's flora and fauna. Norgannon lent a portion of his intellect and mastery of magic to Keepers Loken and 𝑚imiron. Lastly, Agramar imparted his strength and courage to Keeper Tyr, who would become the greatest warrior of the Titan Forged. With this new army molded from the world's crust, the Pantheon went to war. The time to shatter the Black Empire and free Azeroth from its malign influence had come. Wrath of the Titan Forged. Led by Keepers, the Titan Forged slammed into the Black Empire's northernmost holdings. The resilience and strength of the Pantheon's armies made them an unstoppable force. They unleashed the wrath of the gods upon their enemies, scouring legions of Naraki and 𝒆𝒅 and sundering their temples. The arrival of the Titan Forged caught the old gods completely off guard. They reeled in response to these stone and metal-skinned invaders, but they were determined not to lose control over Azeroth. To reassert their dominance, the old gods called upon their greatest lieutenants, the Elemental Lords. The enraged Elemental Lords and their minions beset the Titan Forged on all sides. Ever wary of fighting a unified elemental army, the Keepers resolved to divide and conquer their enemies. Thus they split their own forces and dispatched each group of Titan Forged to make a war on a specific elemental lord. Tyr and Odyn volunteered to confront the most destructive elemental lieutenant, Ragnaros the Fire Lord. Their battle raged for weeks, engulfing the land in fire and magma. Yet the Keepers' resilient metal forms kept them safe from Ragnaros' fiery onslaughts. Through sheer strength and force of will, Tyr and Odyn pushed Ragnaros back into his volcanic lair in the east. In a land of boiling acid seas and skies choked with ash, the two Keepers defeated the Fire Lord. Meanwhile, Arcadis and Freya unleashed their powers upon Therazane the Stone Mother. To protect herself and her minions, the elemental ruler retreated into the towering stone spire that she called home. Arcadis used his dominion over the earth to weaken the citadel's foundations and shatter the craggy giants who guarded it. Freya then made colossal roots sprout from the ground to entangle the fortress. They wormed through stone and crystal, buckled the citadel's walls, and brought them down on Therazane's head. Ra, Thorim, and Hodir waged war with 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 the Windlord. Using their mastery over the skies and storms, they forced the Elemental Lord back into his lair among the highest peaks of Azeroth. Lightning set the heavens aflame as 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 struggled to hold off his foes. In the end, the three keepers turned the Elemental Lord's own power against him, defeating 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 atop his lofty domain. Neptulon the Tidehunter and his minions rushed to aid the other embattled Elemental Lords, but they were waylaid by Loken and 𝒉𝒂𝒻𝒻. The two keepers used their wits to harry and outmaneuver Neptulon's forces at every turn. Ultimately, Loken unleashed his arcane powers to freeze and shatter the water elemental's forms, while 𝒉𝒂𝒻 crafted enchanted bonds to imprison Neptulon himself. Although the Elemental Lords had been defeated, the keepers knew that they could not utterly destroy the beings. The spirits of the elementals were bound to Azeroth itself. If they were killed, their corporeal forms would simply manifest again in time. Ra soon found a solution. He set out to imprison the elementals, much as the great Sargeras had done to demons. Ra first called on the aid of the gifted Titan-forged sorceress Helya. They worked in concert to craft 4 interlinked domains within a pocket dimension known as the Elemental Plane. Ra and Helya then banished the Elemental Lords and nearly all of their servants to this enchanted prison realm. Ragnaros and the fire elementals were exiled to a smoldering corner of the elemental plane known as the Firelands. Therazane and the earth elementals were locked within the crystalline caverns of Deepholm. 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 and the air elementals were imprisoned among the cloudy spires of the skywall. Lastly, Neptulon and the water elementals were sucked into the fathomless depths of the abyssal maw. Only a few elementals would remain on the surface of Azeroth. With their leaders gone, these beings scattered and abandoned the war. Having contained the elementals, the keepers turned their attention to the Black Empire's 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 legions. Many of the insectoids dwelled in vast catacombs that snaked beneath the surface of the devastated world. Arcadus bent the stones and soil to his will, collapsing the 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 burrows and driving the creatures above ground. Upon emerging from their lairs, the insectoids found themselves surrounded by the Titan-forged. The battles between the Titan-forged and the 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 proved unexpectedly vicious. In time, the keepers destroyed most of the 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 race. Small pockets of the insectoids, those that had tunneled deep underground, escaped the keepers' wrath. Yet, they were too weakened to mount a counterattack. Fall of the Black Empire. The victories over the 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝒂 and the elementals heartened the keepers, but they knew that their greatest battles were still to come. As one, they've turned their righteous gaze on the heart of the Black Empire, the sprawling temple city built around the old god Y'Shaarj. By toppling the most powerful 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒂 bastion on Azeroth, the keepers believed they could crush their enemies in one swift stroke. The keepers and their allies waded through one swarm of 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒂 after another as they battled their way toward the mountainous form of Y'Shaarj. The broken and mangled bodies of Titan-forged and 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒂 alike riddled the landscape by the time the invaders breached the city and assaulted the old god himself. Y'Shaarj was more powerful than the keepers had expected. It poisoned the minds of Titan-forged, drawing out their fears and darkening their thoughts. The Pantheon grew concerned that the old god would overwhelm their servants. Despite the risk of harming the world, they decided to take direct action. Aman'Thul himself reached down through Azeroth's stormy skies and took hold of 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕's writhing body. With a heave of his mighty arm, he tore the old god from the crust of the world. In that moment, 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕's gargantuan bulk was ripped apart. The immensity of the old god's death rattle shattered mountaintops and obliterated hundreds of Titanforged where they stood. 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 was dead, but its tendrils had bored more deeply through Azeroth than Aman'Thul had ever imagined. In excising the old god from the world, he had inadvertently ripped an eternal wound in Azeroth's surface. Volatile arcane energies, the lifeblood of the nascent Titan, erupted from the scar and roiled out across the world. Horrified by this turn of events, the Pantheon realized they could not risk killing the other old gods in such a manner. The malignant creatures had embedded themselves so deep into the world that tearing them out would destroy Azeroth itself. The Pantheon knew that the only course of action was to imprison the old gods where they lay and contain their evil forever. It would be a difficult task, but it would be possible with the aid of the Keepers. At the Pantheon's behest, the Titanforged devised a plan to shatter the last vestiges of the Black Empire forever. They would battle each of the old gods directly. Once they had weakened the creatures, Arcadis would create subterranean chambers to contain them. Mimiron would fashion colossal machineries to lock the old gods in place. When this work was done, Loken would imbue each prison with a great enchantment that would neutralize the old god's evil. With their plans formed, the Titanforged began their campaign. Great battles tore across the land as the Titanforged fought their way southeast to the bastion of 𝑛'Zoth. After overwhelming the old god, the Keepers used their powers to encase the creature in an underground prison. Next, the Titanforged marched southwest to the sprawling temple city that had grown around the third old god, Cthulhu. The Keepers and their allies purged swarms of Naraaki before assaulting the old god itself and subduing it. Much as they had done with 𝑛'Zoth, the Keepers entombed the entity beneath the earth and constructed a prison of their own devising over its form. Only one old god remained, the vicious and cunning 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕. It would not fall so easily. As the Titanforged closed in on 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕's crumbling northern stronghold, the old god unleashed the greatest of its generals, the Cthulhu. The Cthulhu were monstrous warbringers, larger and more resilient than other Naraaki. They possessed great strength and brutal intellect, and their dark powers and maledictions could drive even the Titanforged to madness. The giant tentacle-faced Cthulhu whipped the remnants of the Black Empire into a frenzy. They swarmed the Titanforged on all sides, thinning their ranks. By the time the Keepers and the allies reached 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕, their forces were greatly diminished. They found that they lacked the strength of numbers to defeat the old god. 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 would have destroyed the Titanforged completely if not for the heroic efforts of Odyn. Although scarred and battered by war, Odyn summoned his waning strength and inspired the Titanforged to launch a counterattack. He commanded Loken to weave a grand illusion spell that forced the Cthulhu to see themselves and even 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 as the enemy. As the Black Empire's forces turned on one another, Odyn swooped in to cut down his confused foes. The other Titan Forged followed his lead, and together they succeeded in pacifying ☆ As they had done with Cthulhu and N'Zoth, the Keepers buried the entity beneath the earth, locking it away in a monolithic, enchanted prison. The Well of Eternity and the World Forges. For the first time in Azeroth's history, a tentative peace settled over the world. The Titan Forged had banished the chaotic elemental lords to another plane of existence. They had also purged the Black Empire and muted the terrible power of the old gods. Against all odds, Azeroth had been saved. But there was much work to be done. The Keeper's most pressing concern was the horrific scar left behind when Aman'Thul had torn ☆ from the world's crust. A constant stream of volatile arcane energy bled from the colossal rift, lashing out across the world. The Keepers knew that if left unattended, these energies would consume Azeroth over time. The Keepers labored day and night, crafting magic wards around the gaping wound to stanch the escaping lifeblood. Eventually, the tumultuous energies calmed and settled into balance. All that remained of the scar was an immense lake of scintillating energy that the Keepers would call the Well of Eternity. Thereafter, the power of this wondrous fount would be infused in the ailing world, helping life to take root and bloom across the globe. With the wound healed, the Keepers sought to strengthen Azeroth's nascent world soul and stabilize its life force. To do so, Arcadis and Memoron combined their powers to craft the Forge of Wills and the Forge of Origination. These two extraordinary machines would work in tandem, infusing Azeroth's slumbering spirit with cosmic energies. The Forge of Wills would be embedded in the northern reaches of the world, and it would shape the world soul's budding sentience. The Forge of Origination would be installed in the southern reaches of Azeroth, and it would regulate the rhythms of the deep earth and fortify the world soul's form. After these two machines were constructed, the Keepers went to work. Odyn oversaw efforts to install the Forge of Wills within a vast northern mountain range that would become known as the Storm Peaks. The Pantheon appointed Odyn the prime designate for his valorous deeds in the war with the old gods. The task of watching over Yogg-Saron's prison and maintaining the Forge of Wills would fall to him. Odyn and the other Keepers immediately began building the great fortress of Ulduar to serve as the main bastion of the Titan Forged on Azeroth. The fortress would house not only Yogg-Saron's prison, but also the Forge of Wills and other machineries of the Keepers' devising. The Forge of Wills also served another purpose. It could draw on the life essence of Azeroth itself, giving shape and sentience to creatures of living stone and metal. Not only giants, but other types of Titan Forged as well. This new generation of Titan Forged would help the Keepers bring order to the world. As the Forge of Wills churned out these new Titan Forged, High Keeper Ra led an expedition to install the Forge of Origination in the south. He was accompanied by a number of stone-skinned creatures recently wrought from the Forge of Wills. The Anubisath giants, the Leonine Tol'vir, and the indomitable Mogu. En route, Ra discovered that remnants of ☆'s corporeal form lay strewn across the southern reaches of the world. When Aman'Thul had ripped the old god from Azeroth, pieces of the entity had fallen back to the surface, infusing the land with evil. The largest intact piece of ☆ was the old god's icy heart, a mass of diseased flesh, seething with void energies. Rather than destroy the heart, Ra built a subterranean vault to contain it and neutralize its evil. He, along with the other keepers, knew that studying the heart could help them understand the nature of the old gods and other void creatures. Ra charged his Mugu followers with watching over the vault of Y'Shaarj. They would guard and care for the surrounding land as well. There, he and his followers embedded the Forge of Origination in the land. The earth rumbled beneath Ra's feet as the gargantuan machine churned to life. The High Keeper soon sensed that the twin forges were working in synergy, sending healing energies through the heart of the world. Ra and his followers erected a sprawling 𝒉𝒂𝒐𝒂𝒂, and it would become the southernmost base of operations for the Keepers. Much like the Forge of Wills, the Forge of Origination would serve a dual purpose. In the event that Azeroth's flora and fauna succumb to corruption, the incredible energies stored inside the Great Machine could be unleashed to eradicate all life on Earth, allowing it to start anew. Highkeeper Ra commanded some of the 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒏𝒆𝒍 and Anubisaths to safeguard Uldum forever. He and the rest of his servants marched northwest into a land later known as Silithus. This arid and inhospitable region was home to the subterranean prison that housed the old god Cthulhu. Ra and his allies labored to expand on the prison, ultimately constructing the mighty fortress of Ahn'Qiraj. After this task was done, the High Keeper ordered his remaining Titan Forge to safeguard the stronghold. Ra himself, seeing his work completed, would spend the following ages roaming the southern regions of Azeroth, distantly observing his Titan Forged and ensuring that they upheld their sacred charges. The Ordering of Azeroth called on the new generation of servants wrought from the Forge of Wills. Each of these loyal and mighty Titan Forged would play a different role in ordering and protecting the world. The craggy, kind-hearted Earthen would specialize in crafting mountains and carving out the deep places of the world. The clockwork mechagnomes, designed by Keeper Mimiron, would help build and maintain the Keeper's extraordinary machineries. The stone-skinned Mogu would dig out the myriad rivers and waterways of Azeroth. The task of safeguarding many of the Keeper's holdings would fall to two different groups of constructs, the iron-skinned Vrykul and the chiseled 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒏𝒆𝒍. To shape the environment, the Keepers also conscripted the powerful stone and sea giants. They would roam the breadth of Azeroth, lifting towering mountain ranges and dredging out the fathomless seas. As the Titan Forged began shaping Azeroth, Keeper Freya set out to populate the world with organic life. To do so, she crafted the Emerald Dream, a vast and ever-shifting dimension of spirits and nature magic. This ethereal plane acted as a mirror image of Azeroth, helping regulate the evolutionary path of the world's flora and fauna. A confluence of spirits and strange otherworldly beings populated the dream, frolicking in the surreal paradise that was their home. The mystical dream defied mortal perceptions of reality. Concepts like time and distance held no sway within this realm of intangibles. A day on the physical world could feel like decades in the dream. Freya then wandered the world, searching for areas where the Well of Eternity's energies had coalesced. These regions created optimal conditions for the development of new flora and fauna. Freya shaped immense enclaves of nature at these places of power. She molded life of astounding diversity, seeding it around the world. The sites where Freya had done her work were located at the polar extremes of the world. They included regions that would later become known as Ungoro Crater, Sholazar Basin, and the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The greatest creatures to emerge from these enclaves were colossal animals known as the Wild Gods. Freya adored and cared for these majestic beings as if they were her very own children. She often wandered the physical world with the Wild Gods at her side, vibrant forests and grasslands blooming in their footsteps. Yet there was one place she and the Wild Gods frequented more than any other, a massive forested peak called Mount Hyjal. It was on the slopes of Hyjal that Freya bound the spirits of her beloved Wild Gods to the Emerald Dream. Inexorably tied to the ethereal realm, they would come to symbolize the health and vitality of Azeroth itself. Forever after, Hyjal would remain a refuge and sacred place to the Wild Gods. As Freya's creations explored the world, they came across a number of other strange life forms. These creatures had emerged from Azeroth's elemental past of their own free will. When the Keepers had sealed off the elemental plane, some stragglers had escaped banishment. The fury of these spirits had ebbed over time, and they had become creatures of flesh and blood. It was from these former elementals that some forms of wildlife, such as proto-dragons, came to be. In time, the Keepers and their servants stabilized Azeroth's main landmass, a continent that teemed with plants and creatures of every kind. Twilight fell as the Titan Forged surveyed the world they had shaped, and they named the primary continent Kalimdor, Land of Eternal Starlight. The Pantheon's departure. Pleased with the Keeper's efforts and assured that the slumbering world soul was in good hands, the Pantheon prepared to venture back into the Great Dark. The discovery of Azeroth was proof that other nascent titans could exist in the universe, and the titans were eager to renew their search. The Keepers mourned the imminent departure of their makers, but they also brimmed with pride at being given the honor of safeguarding Azeroth. To commemorate the Pantheon's departure, Loken and 𝑚𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 crafted a set of enchanted artifacts called the Discs of Norgannon, which would transcribe history as it unfolded on Azeroth. If ever the Pantheon returned, they would possess a record of what had come to pass in their absence. In his final act before departing, Aman'Thul commissioned the constellar Algalon the Observer to serve as the world's celestial guardian. The possibility that the world soul could become corrupted was one that the Titans could not ignore. Should that come to pass, Algalon had the power to initiate a procedure that would activate the Forge of Origination, purging the world of life and any corruption that was present. With that, the Pantheon bade the Titan Forged farewell and disappeared into the stars. The Titans had done everything possible to heal Azeroth and assure the world soul's maturation. All that remained now was to wait and hope that the world soul would one day awaken. Galakrond, who dwelled in the frozen north of Kalimdor. The various proto-dragon species had a wide array of strength and abilities. Some were gigantic winged beings of incredible fortitude, their spirits tied to the world itself. Others had unknowingly tapped into the latent elemental energies that permeated the newly ordered world. But there was one proto-dragon whose brutality and devastating power overshadowed the rest of his kind. His name was Galakrond, and he was the largest proto-dragon who had ever soared across Azeroth's skies. so mighty in forests. Strength, however, was not his only weapon. Galakrond came to dominate the most sought-after hunting grounds in northern Kalimdor. Compelled by an insatiable hunger, he devoured everything and could ever sate his cravings. So terrible was his hunger that Galakrond began feasting on other proto-dragons, even the corpses of the dead. Devouring fallen proto-dragons eventually warped Galakrond's mind and body with a necrotic affliction. Misshapen limbs and dozens of eyes sprouted across his gargantuan form. Death energies wafted off of Galakrond's jagged hide, reanimating dead matter. These necrotic powers were infused in Galakrond's victims, and they rose from the dead as mindless abominations. The ranks of Galakrond's wretched minions expanded. Soon he and his followers terrorized the skies over Kalimdor. The other proto-dragons, fractured by long-standing rivalries, failed to unite against this new threat. Tyr, the mightiest of the Keepers, was the first of his kind to notice the danger posed by Galakrond. He warned his fellow Keepers of what he had seen, but he could not motivate them to act. Though the Keepers had once sworn to protect the world, the war with the old gods and the Ordering of Azeroth had sapped their collective strength and willpower. They had become indifferent to the world at large, focused solely on maintaining their vaults and arcane machineries. But Tyr was not deterred by his siblings' apathy. His drive to seek justice and order in the world pushed him forward. Tyr knew that if Galakrond remained unchecked, he would devour all nature, spreading his affliction to the far corners of Azeroth. Thus, the Keepers saw a means to destroy the giant proto-dragon and his minions. Tyr found his answer with 5 of the greatest and most intelligent proto-dragons in existence: Alexstrasza, Neltharion, Malygos, Ysera, and Nozdormu. Nearly all of these creatures hailed from different strains, and each of them displayed unique powers. Even the 2 sisters, Alexstrasza and Ysera, commanded distinct abilities. The tenacious and kind-hearted Alexstrasza could summon gouts of fire from her maw. The mighty Neltharion possessed incredible strength, and his piercing roar could shatter bone and rock alike. The cunning Malygos could breathe frost, encasing his foes in solid ice. The wise Nozdormu could assail his enemies with blinding storms of coarse sand. The elusive Ysera's breath could debilitate her enemies, sapping their willpower and throwing them into a deep trance. Tyr beseeched the 5 proto-dragons for aid in thwarting Galakrond. The creatures were initially suspicious of the strange being who had approached them, but they soon vowed to fight by his side. Despite their differences, the 5 proto-dragons showed a surprising willingness to work as one. Under Tyr's guidance, Alexstrasza and her companions warred with Galakrond and his defeated minions. Their battles raged over the snowy peaks and rocky spires of northern Kalimdor. Initially, Galakrond's jagged hide warded off the attacks of the 5 proto-dragons. Though disheartened by their enemies' resilience, Alexstrasza and her allies soon found his weakness. They assaulted Galakrond's many eyes and his soft, vulnerable gullet. By using their powers in harmony and trusting in one another, the 5 proto-dragons vanquished the gargantuan foe. Galakrond's lifeless husk plummeted to the ground, smashing into the frozen tundra of what would become known as the Dragonflight. The 5 proto-dragons had won despite all odds, but they had only done so by working together. It was a lesson they would not soon forget. Alexstrasza and the others would carry on this ideal of unity and cooperation for ages to come. Charge of the Dragonflights. While Tyr and the proto-dragons were battling Galakrond, the other keepers finally emerged from their stupor. Too late, they realized the threat that the corrupted monstrosity posed. They were heartened by the resolve of Tyr's winged allies and ashamed of their own apathy. Tyr, however, never chastised the other keepers. Instead, he convinced them to imbue the 5 proto-dragons with powers so that they could safeguard the lands of Azeroth. Only Keeper Odyn challenged this idea. Though he acknowledged the proto-dragon's heroism, he did not agree that Azeroth's fate should be placed on their shoulders. Odyn saw 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 and her ilk as primitive life forms. Only the mighty Titanforge could be trusted to protect the world. Odyn argued that as Prime Designate, he had the final decision on how to proceed. Yet Tyr and the other keepers disagreed. Through bravery and self-sacrifice, the proto-dragons had earned the right to act as Azeroth's guardians. Despite Odyn's continued protests, the other keepers moved forward with their plans. After the proto-dragons defeated Galakrond, the keepers journeyed to the frozen tundra where the final battle had taken place. Even Ra traveled from the distant south to take part in the great ceremony that was to come. Acting as conduits of their creator's powers, the gathered keepers bestowed their blessings of the Pantheon upon each proto-dragon. High Keeper Ra channeled the powers of his creator, 𝒉𝒂𝒐𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍, into the proto-dragon 𝑛osdormu. Of all 𝒉𝒂𝒐𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍's myriad powers, 𝒚osdormu was blessed with a mastery of time itself. Henceforth, 𝒚osdormu became known as the Timeless One, and he held dominion over the interweaving pathways of fate and destiny. The nurturing and ever-merciful Freya called upon her creator, 𝒉𝒂𝒐𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍, to empower the proto-dragon 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒂. Known thereafter as the Lifebinder, 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒂 would devote everything she was to the stewardship of the living world. Having proved her courage and compassion in the battles against Galakrond, she was crowned the Dragon Queen and given command over her kind. Freya also beseeched 𝒉𝒂𝒐𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 to bless 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒂's younger sister, the proto-dragon 𝒌𝒌𝒂𝒂, with nature's influence. 𝒌𝒌𝒂𝒂 was charged with keeping watch over the flowering wilds of Azeroth from within the Emerald Dream. Bound to this ethereal realm, she descended into an endless trance and became known thereafter as the Dreamer. Keeper Loken called on his creator, Norgannon, to endow the proto-Malygos would be known as the Spellweaver, explore and protect. Lastly, of his vast power upon the indomitable proto-dragon Neltharion. Known afterward as the Earth Warder, Neltharion was given charge over the mountains and deep caverns of the earth. He embodied the strength of the world and served for many long ages as 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒂's greatest friend and confidant. Bristling with the Pantheon's energies, the 5 proto-dragons transformed into immense and graceful creatures. 𝒚osdormu's hide took on a bronze hue like a sea of shimmering golden sand. 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒂's scales turned a deep and vivid shade of red. Ysera's lithe form became a vibrant green to reflect her new connection with nature. Malygos turned an icy blue color, and his very scales radiated potent arcane energies. Neltharion's rough hide became an earthy black. From that day forward, these 5 extraordinary beings would become known as the Dragon Aspects. The Keepers also sought to create new species to help the Dragon Aspects protect the world. These beings would serve the aspects as consorts and allies. To this end, the keepers magically altered hundreds of proto-dragon eggs. From them would emerge creatures born in the image of the aspects. This new race, known as dragons, would form 5 distinct flights: bronze, red, green, blue, and black. Though each of these flights would serve a different dragon aspect, they would all be bound by their duty to protect Azeroth. To strengthen this bond, the Keepers forged a grand tower in northern Kalimdor called Wyrmrest Temple. It would serve as the heart of the dragon's culture, a sanctuary where they could gather and discuss their activities, but above all, Wyrmrest would stand as a symbol of their unity. The Keepers, satisfied with their work, disappeared back inside their lairs, leaving the aspects to watch over the living creatures of Azeroth. Odyn and the Raising of the Halls of Valor. As the other Keepers were conducting their ceremony to empower the dragon aspects, Odyn brooded within the halls of Ulduar. He was furious that his allies had acted against his wishes, the wishes of the Prime Designate. More than that, Odyn believed with all his heart that the dragon aspects would fail in their charge to safeguard the world. For the good of Azeroth, Odyn decided to take matters into his own hands. He would create an elite army of his design, one that he could call on to protect the world should the need ever rise. To fill the ranks of this fighting force, Odyn would look to the mighty 𝒉𝒂𝒂. He had always admired their innate courage and strength. He saw the 𝒉𝒂𝒂 above all other Titanforged as the perfect expression of the warrior spirit. Upon returning to Ulduar, Tyr and the other Keepers demanded that Odyn abandon his foolish plans. Yet their words had no effect on the Prime Designate. Odyn was single-minded in his focus and unbending in his ideas of what was right. He invited the other Keepers to help him create his army. When none stepped forward to join his cause, Odyn announced he would pursue his quest without them. Odyn secured one of Ulduar's wings to act as the base for his new army. To permanently separate it from the rest of the fortress and from the other Keepers, he called on the Titanforge sorceress Helya. Over the ages, Odyn had come to see her as his adopted daughter. Helya wove a great spell to encase the Keeper's stronghold. Then, focusing all of her power, she ripped the colossal chunk of Ulduar from the earth and lifted it into the cloudy skies. In time, this floating citadel would become known as the Halls of Valor. From atop his fortress, Odyn bellowed out a proclamation to all 𝒉𝒂𝒂. Those who proved their bravery by dying glorious deaths in battle would live again in the Halls of Valor. Their spirits would be transported to the fortress and given mighty, new storm-forged bodies. These champions, these 𝒉𝒂𝒍, would serve as Azeroth's foremost guardians. Their deeds would live on in the hearts of all Titanforged forever after. All that remained was to find a means of ferrying the spirits of the dead to the Halls of Valor. For this, Odyn studied the energies that permeated the Shadowlands. The knowledge he gained would allow him to transform some 𝒉𝒂𝒂 into spectral beings known as the Valkyr. These wraith-like servants would travel between the Shadowlands and the physical world, guiding the souls of the worthy 𝒉𝒂𝒂 to the Halls of Valor. Yet those who became Valkyr would be cursed to live as phantom beings for all eternity. No 𝒉𝒂𝒂 volunteered for the grim task of becoming a Valkyr, and thus Odyn decided he would create his servants by force. Helya admonished the Keeper for his willingness to turn the Titanforge into slaves against their will. The argument between her and Odyn grew so heated that the two nearly came to blows. In the end, Helya warned that she would return the Halls of Valor to Ulduar if Odyn did not change his mind. Odyn saw Helya's disobedience as a threat not only to his plans, but to the future safety of Azeroth itself. Blinded by his dreams of what the Halls of Valor could become, he struck out at the sorceress. Odyn shattered her physical form and twisted her spirit into the first of the Valkyr. Helya's howls of pain and anger rumbled across the surface of Azeroth and pierced into the very heart of the Shadowlands. This violent transformation would forever darken Helya, but her torment was not finished. Though she loathed Odyn for what he had done to her, she found herself compelled to obey his will. Under Odyn's command, she set out to transform unwilling 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 into the cursed Valkyr. For ages, Helya and her fellow Valkyr brought the souls of heroic 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒆𝒍 to the halls of Valor. The citadel became filled with storm-infused Valazar. Odyn trained and empowered each of these warriors. He had no remorse for breaking from the Keepers or for transforming Helya into the first Valkyr. In Odyn's mind, everything he had done was for the safety of Azeroth and in honor of the great Pantheon. Sargeras and the Betrayal. The Keepers went about their duties on Azeroth, unaware of a new threat that was taking shape in the distant reaches of the Great Dark. Sargeras, having broken all ties with the Pantheon, meditated on the fate of the universe in isolation. His fear that the Void Lords had already corrupted other world souls consumed him. As doubt and despair continued twisting the Titan's every thought, he became more certain than ever that creation itself was fatally flawed. Finally, he concluded that the only way to spare the universe was to purge it in fire. Thus, his grand Burning Crusade would begin. To accomplish this Burning Crusade, Sargeras required a vast force of unquenchable rage. He knew of only one place that held such power and potential: Mardom, the plane of banishment. Over the ages, the prison had become bloated with fell magic and vengeful demons. Their presence had warped Mardom, transforming it into a realm of nightmare. Torrents of fell energy ceaselessly bombarded the prison's walls, bathing the captive demons in a roiling sea of volatile magic. Sargeras quelled his remaining apprehension and tore the prison asunder, spilling its wrathful denizens into the great dark beyond. The subsequent explosion of fell magic was powerful beyond even what the fallen Titan had imagined. Violent energies enveloped Sargeras, surging through his veins and searing his very soul. His eyes burst in gouts of emerald fire. Fell volcanoes ignited across his once noble form, splitting his skin apart and revealing an endless furnace of blistering hate. Yet despite these horrific physical changes, Sargeras' mind remained locked on his one all-consuming purpose: to prevent the Void Lords from possessing creation. Life itself had to be extinguished. In shattering the prison, Sargeras had ruptured the boundary between the Great Dark and the Twisting Nether. A monstrous celestial maw, limbed in a storm of emerald fire, had ripped through the fabric of reality. It would remain a scar on creation, smoldering proof of Sargeras' madness for all eternity. Demons of every shape and size poured into the physical universe from this rift, howling in triumph at their release. Sargeras imbued the ravenous masses with his power, uniting them as one in an inferno of fell magic. Though many demons had previously tapped into the volatile energies of the Nether, none had ever experienced the pure might and rage found in Sargeras' fell. Some of the creatures grew in size and stature. Still others felt new cunning and intelligence unfold in their minds. By this point, Sargeras had learned more about the nature of demons, including how to permanently destroy their spirits. He offered a simple pact in exchange for the demon's newfound power: fight at his command or be extinguished. It was not a difficult choice. To thwart the Void Lords, Sargeras unleashed his army, his burning legion, upon the innumerable worlds of the Great Dark. Never before had the forces of evil been united in such numbers. Sargeras wielded enough power to make disobedience all but unthinkable. None would dream of challenging him, but more importantly, his minions grew to delight in their role as agents of extinction. The Burning Legion fell upon its first world. Though it did not contain a slumbering titan, it was a world that had been ordered by the Pantheon in ages past. Sargeras' forces incinerated the mortal civilizations that dwelled there, wiping out dozens of sentient species. When the constellar whom the Pantheon had charged to oversee the world arrived, Sargeras himself annihilated the celestial being. 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 was the first to learn of the constellar's demise. As more news of the Burning Legion's atrocities reached him, he hunted down the demonic army. 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 arrived just in time to witness the Legion scouring yet another world, and he saw the twisted, fire-wreathed being leading it, his mentor and greatest friend, Sargeras. 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 was stunned. He demanded an explanation from Sargeras. The former champion offered none, only declaring that his Burning Crusade was the sole means to purify the universe. Anyone who stood against him, Sargeras added, would burn in the fires of his legion as well. Knowing that he could not sway Sargeras with words, 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 challenged his former mentor to single combat. Before the watching eyes of the demon masses, the two greatest warriors the universe had ever known came to blows. 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 soon found himself outmatched. Like all titans, he was uniquely susceptible to fell magic. Sargeras' ferocious assaults shattered 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍's defenses and sent him reeling in agony. In a final desperate counterattack, 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 summoned all the power at his command and struck at Sargeras. Their two blades met, igniting a furious explosion of fell and arcane power. When the torrent of warring energies finally subsided, Sargeras and 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 saw that both of their weapons had been shattered. Heavily wounded by the blast, 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 retreated from battle and returned to the rest of the Pantheon. Disbelief gripped the other titans as they learned what had happened. The thought of their most trusted and noble warrior falling to darkness shook their faith to the core. The Pantheon could not fathom how to stop such a threat, yet they agreed they could not just sit idly by. Girded for war, the combined might of the Pantheon confronted Sargeras and his unholy legion near a world named Nihilam. 𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍 called out to Sargeras, pleading with him to abandon his mad Burning Crusade. He told Sargeras of Azeroth, a fledgling world soul with more potential than any of the Pantheon had ever seen, a being strong enough to defeat the Void Lords in due time. Sargeras listened carefully, but was unmoved. Despite his earlier battle with Sargeras, 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 believed that something noble still lingered in the former champion's heart. As a last resort, he laid down his arms and approached the fallen titan. 𝒂𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 recounted tales of their glorious battles against demons, reminding Sargeras of the sacred oaths they had sworn to protect creation. But Sargeras was set in his ways. Nothing the Pantheon could say, Nothing even his cherished protege could say would ever change his mind. With a howl of rage and sorrow, Sargeras struck Agramar down, his ruined fell blade nearly cleaving the Titan in two. Infuriated by this unthinkable murder, the Pantheon launched an all-out assault on Sargeras and his Burning Legion. Stars withered and died as the battle raged across the cosmos, scarring vast stretches of reality. Nihilam, known thereafter as the Doom World, became warped and twisted by the apocalyptic conflict. The Titans of the Pantheon wielded powers incomprehensible to mortal minds, yet even they could not overcome Sargeras' fel-fueled mind. The fallen Titan decimated the Pantheon members with the fel fire until he had broken their will to fight. To seal their demise, Sargeras summoned a massive fel storm that would consume their bodies and souls alike. Yet just as the furious onslaught of energy washed over the defeated Titans, Norgannon made one last attempt to stave off oblivion. Norgannon bent the raw energies of the universe to his will, weaving a protective shroud around each of the Pantheon Titan's spirits and launching them into the Great Dark. While the Titans' disembodied souls hurtled through the cosmos, Sargeras' fel storm obliterated what remained of their physical forms. Unaware that the Titan spirits had survived, Sargeras declared the Burning Legion victorious. The Pantheon was no more, and he now had tantalizing clues about a powerful world soul called Azeroth. Yet though Sargeras had learned the name of this nascent Titan, its whereabouts remained a mystery. Nonetheless, without the Pantheon to oppose him, he knew he would find the world soul in time, and he knew he would have to do so before the Void Lords did. The Burning Crusade. The Burning Legion had triumphed over the Pantheon, and Sargeras moved to rally even more demons to his cause. Yet the fight with the Pantheon had exposed a flaw in his seemingly unstoppable army, one that he was determined to remedy. For all of Sargeras' vast power and intellect, he could not direct his entire army at once. Demons were vicious and bloodthirsty, but most lacked strategic thinking. Most of the Legion had fallen needlessly to the Pantheon. Sargeras wanted cunning and tactically minded commanders to join his side, and he had seen a place from which to harvest such servants, a world called Argus. Argus was home to the highly advanced Eredar, a race far more intelligent than any other Sargeras had encountered. The Eredar hungered for knowledge above all else. By attaining it, they believed they could shape the universe into a better and more benevolent place. A triumvirate of leaders ruled over the Eredar, not by might or fear, but by contemplating the great questions of the cosmos and sharing the answers with their people. The mighty Archimonde had a gift for finding the strengths in those around him. His bold demeanor inspired his followers, filling them with confidence and the courage to face any challenge. Kil'jaeden, the most brilliant of the rulers, was considered a prodigy even among the gifted Eredar. Witty and cunning, he reveled in puzzling out the most confounding mysteries of the cosmos. Last there was Velen, the spiritual heart of the triumvirate. He stood as a relentless champion of peace whose wisdom could diffuse any conflict. Individually, each member of the triumvirate would have made an excellent leader, but it was together, with each of their strengths working in synergy, that they elevated their people to heights undreamt of. The Eredar's great cohesion was the ideal solution to the Legion's weaknesses. Yet to conscript them to his cause, Sargeras would have to corrupt them entirely. In the guise of a radiant and elegant being, he communed with the Eredar triumvirate. Sargeras played to their desires, promising them knowledge and unimaginable power. He showed them worlds beyond count over which they might hold dominion, primitive places that the Eredar could transform into sanctuaries of peace and intellectual thought. Sargeras vowed to share with the Eredar not only the most obscure secrets of existence, but also the final answer as to what he believed was the fundamental flaw in creation. In return, the denizens of Argus would devote themselves to Sargeras' grand work and help him remedy that flaw. The offer awed both Archimonde and Kil'jaeden, who were honored to be part of this grand undertaking. Velen, however, was not convinced. He sensed something strange about the seemingly beautiful and all-knowing creature who had appeared to them. Velen meditated using an ancient artifact gift to his race by the holy Naru long before his time, the Adamal crystal. Through the enchanted relic, he received a horrific vision of the Eredar's future if they sided with Sargeras. They would become horribly disfigured, transformed into demonic beings of depthless evil. Velen warned his brothers of what he had seen, but they dismissed his insights and made it clear they intended to accept Sargeras' offer. Fearing that Archimonde and Kil'jaeden would kill him if he continued to dissent, Velen feigned acceptance. Though he and Kil'jaeden were particularly close friends, Velen didn't believe he could trust their bond to prevail over Sargeras' enticing promises. Velen despaired at the fate of his people. In this moment of desperation, the same beings who had granted him his vision of the Eredar's downfall reached out to him. One of the Naru, Kure, contacted the Eredar leader and offered to shepherd him and his closest allies to safety. Filled with renewed hope, Velen sought out the other Eredar whom he believed he could trust. As Sargeras arrived on Argus to corrupt the unsuspecting Eredar, Velen and his followers made their daring escape. They gathered aboard a massive Naru dimensional fortress known as the Genedar and fled their homeworld forever. From that day forward, Velen and his followers would be known as the Draenei, or the Exiled Ones. On Argus, Sargeras bent the other Eredar to his unholy will. Fanatical fell whisperings surged through the minds of the world's inhabitants, drowning out their ability to reason. Sargeras also infused the Eredar with fell energies, twisting their forms to resemble hideous demons. Sargeras found quick use for his new fell-corrupted converts. The Eredar settled in as commanders within the Burning Legion. Kil'jaeden and Archimonde would stand as the most gifted and powerful among them. Sargeras molded Kil'jaeden's innate cunning and intellect to suit the Legion's designs. Known thereafter as the Deceiver, Kil'jaeden was charged with using his wits to beguile the mortal civilizations of the physical universe and transform them into agents of the Burning Legion. Sargeras also saw Archimonde's talent in motivating his people as an invaluable tool to strengthen the Burning Crusade. Archimonde, henceforth known as the Defiler, would use his powerful will to drive the demonic masses to acts of extreme violence and barbarism. He would draw out and temper the furious strength in all those who served under him, remaking them into weapons of annihilation. Under the Eredar's leadership, the ranks of the Burning Legion swelled with new demonic races, gathered from the Twisting Nether and the worlds of the Great Dark. Archimonde empowered the monstrous pit lords and conscripted them to serve as living siege engines. They would inspire dread in all those they faced. The Moarg, a highly resourceful and industrious race of demons, became the Legion's armorers. They would forge fell-infused weaponry and construct to besiege the world of the cosmos. Kil'jaeden also brought in the devious succubi to infiltrate the prospective worlds for conquest and gather intelligence about their civilizations. The brutal Doomguard, demon warriors of unsurpassed strength and cruelty, fought as the Legion's shock troops. The zealous Shavara became the Legion's foremost mystics and advisors. They fostered a fanatical loyalty to Sargeras. These wicked creatures, among many others, bolstered the might of the Burning Legion. Pleased with his burgeoning forces, Sargeras launched the demons into the Great Dark, renewing his Burning Crusade against creation. In the ages to come, the Legion would scour countless other worlds and civilizations from existence. Loken's Betrayal. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Sargeras, the last embers of the Pantheon's power clung to life. Although Sargeras had destroyed the Titans' physical forms, Norgannon's grand spellwork had preserved their souls. The disembodied Titan spirits hurtled through the Great Dark toward the world of Azeroth and its keepers. There, the Pantheon hoped they could locate the physical forms to inhabit. If they could not find such vessels, the Titans feared their weakened spirits would soon fade into oblivion. Upon reaching Azeroth, the depleted spirits slammed into the Keepers, who had been crafted by the Pantheon's own hands. The Keepers were immediately overwhelmed as the Titans' powers flared in their minds. They witnessed fragmented memories of distant worlds, of lifetimes never lived and wonders never seen. But just as quickly as the influx of power had come, it dimmed. The Keepers, still retaining their original personalities, puzzled over this strange phenomenon. They knew they had been gifted with a portion of the Pantheon's power, but they were unaware that the last remains of their beloved makers had been infused in their very bodies. The bewildered servants called out to the Pantheon for answers, but they received no reply. The deep silence troubled the Keepers, and they sank into a long period of confusion and unease. The old god 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕, imprisoned beneath Ulduar, sensed these fluctuating emotions. In the eons since the Ordering of Azeroth, a sharp awareness had begun to stir within the entity. 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 had devised a plan to weaken its jailers and escape imprisonment. It would corrupt the Fort of Wills, tainting its creation matrix with a strange malady known as the Curse of Flesh. Any Titan forge created by the machine thereafter would fall victim to this affliction. Some would even spread it to the generations of Titan forged. The Curse of Flesh would gradually transform many of these infected servants into mortal beings of flesh and blood, beings who the cunning old god knew could be easily killed. To implement this plan, 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 turned to Keeper Loken. Out of Ulduar's guardians, Loken had been the most troubled by the Pantheon's silence. 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 assailed the Keeper through fevered dreams, stoking the cold fires of his despair. Yet even in his disturbed state, Loken resisted the whisperings in his mind. Ultimately, his downfall would come from a much subtler place. As Loken drifted deeper and deeper into despair, he sought comfort from a 𝒉𝒂𝒂 named Sif, the mate of his brother, Keeper Thorim. Loken often met with Sif in private, telling her of his darkest fears. In time, a forbidden love blossomed between the two Titan forged. 𝑦𝒑𝒑𝒑𝒐𝒓𝒕 latched onto Loken's love for Sif and twisted it into a dangerous obsession. The relationship quickly soured due to Loken's increasingly compulsive behavior. More and more, he talked of openly professing their love for each other, an act that Sif vehemently opposed. She knew that if Thorim discovered the affair, it would shatter the Keeper's unity. Ultimately, she broke all ties with Loken, demanding that he leave her in peace. The thought of losing Sif drove Loken to madness. In a fit of anger and jealousy, he lashed out at his love and killed her. Though racked by guilt, he could not bring himself to tell Thorim of what he had done. Loken scrambled for a way to cover up Sif's death. It was in this time of need that her spirit appeared before his eyes. Much to Loken's surprise, this visage of Sif forgave him. She also warned him of the need to act with haste, lest Thorim learn the truth. If he did, the Titan Forged would descend into civil war, and every pledge Loken had made to the Pantheon would be broken. Sif's suggestion struck Loken as devious, a characteristic he had never known her to possess. He sensed something strange in her spirit, an unseen darkness, subtle yet discernible, but Loken's fear clouded his judgment, and he pushed away his doubts. On Sif's guidance, Loken dragged her corpse into the frigid wastes of the storm peaks. He informed Thorim of his wife's demise and convinced the Keeper that Arngrim, king of the ice giants, was to blame. The grief-stricken Thorim unleashed his unbridled fury, slaying Arngrim and many of his followers. This event ignited a catastrophic war between Thorim's storm giants and Arngrim's ice giants. Sif's spirit continued aiding Loken as the conflict raged. Her guidance became ever more extreme and worrisome, but Loken forged ahead nonetheless. She convinced him to build an army of his own using the Forge of Wills, one large enough to protect Ulduar from the depredations of the warring giants. Loken was even persuaded to punish his brother for starting the war. He berated Thorim for letting anger rule his emotions and for creating such a terrible rift between the Titan Forged. Loken further admonished his brother, claiming that Sif herself would look upon him in shame if she could only see the things he had done in her name. This bitter condemnation threw Thorim into a deep depression. Overcome with regret, he abandoned Ulduar and languished in solitude. With Thorim in isolation, Loken used his newly forged army to overwhelm the giants and end their conflict. All those who resisted his will were locked away in a stasis chamber. But as these battles progressed, Loken noticed something unsettling among the warriors. A dark affliction suffused their spirits. Loken called out to Sif again for advice, but this time she remained silent. Dread overtook the Keeper as he realized that her spirit had not existed at all. She was an illusion created by 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍. Though Loken did not know it, the false spirit of Sif had also tainted the Forge of Wills while the Keeper was creating his army. 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍's curse of flesh had taken root in the heart of the machine's creation matrix. Loken had, in his selfishness, allowed 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍 to play him as an unwitting pawn. This discovery shattered the last vestiges of Loken's noble heart. He became obsessed with keeping his transgressions a secret, even if it meant embracing the power of 𝒆𝒅𝒊𝒂𝒍. With such might at his command, he knew he could defeat the remaining Keepers and destroy all evidence of his wrongdoings. The Sealing of the Halls of Valor. In order to defeat the other Keepers, Loken realized that he would first have to neutralize Odyn and his mighty Valorjar army. But a direct attack against their floating citadel, the Halls of Valor, would be impossible. Instead, Loken took a more insidious approach. He reached out to Odin's adopted daughter, the Valkyr Helja. For millennia, Helja had dutifully followed Odin's commands, transporting the spirits of slain 𝒉𝒂𝒂 to the Halls of Valor. Yet even while she did so, Helja nursed the cold anger that stirred in her phantom heart. She never forgave Odin for turning her into a Valkyr against her will. Helja dreamed of a day when she might avenge what had been done to her and the others who had been transformed into Valkyr. Loken called out to Helya and played on her simmering anger and feelings of betrayal. He promised he would break the chains of servitude that bound her to follow Odin's will. In exchange, she would seal off the Halls of Valor from the world forever. Thereafter, Helya could usurp Odin's role as the caretaker of all 𝒉𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍 spirits. Enticed by this chance to sate her appetite for revenge, she agreed to Loken's plans. After Loken had restored her free will, Helya called on the same powers she had used to secure the elemental plane in ages past. She bent the latent arcane energies swirling around Azeroth to her command, sealing off the Halls of Valor and the inhabitants within. Odyn and his mighty 𝒉𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍 struggled desperately to escape their floating citadel, but they could not break the impregnable barrier that Helya had created. There, the 𝒉𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍 and the Keeper would remain, trapped within the golden corridors of the Halls of Valor for ages to come. Helya, now liberated from her life of servitude, forged a new home for herself and the other Valkyr. She created this enchanted refuge far below the Halls of Valor, binding it to Azeroth's great seas. The ocean mists soon coiled up to envelop Helya's domain and shroud it from sight. Known as Helheim, this realm would become the final destination for many 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒍 spirits after death. Yet the darkness that had long festered in Helya's heart transformed Helheim into a place of nightmare and shadow. The souls of dead 𝒉𝒂𝒂 who arrived there soon found themselves turned into vengeful wraith-like beings. These cursed spirits were known as 𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒂𝒍. They became one with the ocean mists, bound to the ebb and flow of the tides. The eternal fire of malice and anguish that burned in their souls would drive the 𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒂𝒍 to raid and plunder the shores of Kalimdor for all eternity. The Fall of the Keepers. With Odyn and his 𝒉𝒂𝒍 sealed away, Loken returned to Ulduar. He believed he now had ample time to orchestrate the downfall of the other keepers. Yet he soon discovered a new threat to his plans. Mimiron had begun investigating strange anomalies in Loken's new Titan forged. The brilliant keeper suspected that some malfunction within the Forge of Wills was to blame for the impurities he had observed. Before he could pursue this theory, Loken sabotaged the keeper's workshop, killing Mimiron in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Mimiron, however, was not completely dead. Mimiron's faithful mechanomes discovered that their master's spirit lived on. They scrambled to build a giant mechanized body to house the keeper's fading soul. This heroic act saved Mimiron, but he was never secluded himself in Ulduar's vast workshops, spending his days lost in the inner workings of his clockwork inventions. Knowing Mimiron's fate would raise suspicions among the other keepers, Loken dispatched his army to neutralize his remaining brethren. First, Loken confronted Freya at her verdant domain within the Storm Peaks, the Temple of Life. Battle raged between the two keepers and their followers, sundering the temple and bleeding its precious life energies dry. Freya struggled valiantly against her foes, but she ultimately fell to Loken and the shadowy powers 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒍 had granted him. 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒍 itself seized on Freya's weakened state, enthralling her spirit. The old god compelled the broken Freya to withdraw into the halls of Ulduar. There she would spend her forlorn days, tending to a sprawling garden at the heart of the fortress. As Loken confronted Freya, another group of his Titan forged waged war on the mighty keeper Hodir within his lair, the Temple of Winter. Two fire giants named Ignis and Vulcan led the assault. They enveloped the temple in blistering infernos, sapping Hodyr's wintry strength and decimating his icy followers. Loken later arrived to subdue Hodyr directly, a task he completed with ease. Just as it had done with Freya, 𝒂𝒅𝒏𝒂𝒍 warped Hodyr's mind. The entity forced the keeper to retreat into a frigid chamber within Ulduar, where he would remain in seclusion for millennia. Two of the remaining keepers, Tyr and Arcadis, did not fall victim to Loken's schemes. Tyr had long suspected that a darkness was growing within the fallen keeper, a suspicion that was confirmed when he witnessed Loken's attack on Hodyr. Yet Tyr was in no position to confront Loken directly. Throngs of the fallen keeper's loyal Titanforge stalked the storm peaks and the halls of Ulduar. Knowing he stood little chance against this army, Tyr took Arcadis and their close friend, a Titanforge giantess named Ironaya, to the outskirts of the storm peaks. Among the icy cliffs, they waited and watched Loken's schemes unfold, planning their next move. Loken dispatched his forces to hunt down Tyr and his companions. These Titanforged scoured the mountains and caves of the storm peaks, but they never found their prey. Believing that Tyr and his allies had fled the region, Loken asserted sole dominion over Ulduar. He altered the machineries within the fortress and used them to anoint himself the new prime designate of Azeroth. He also disabled the tainted Forge of Wills and banished many of his servants to the storm peaks. Thereafter, he sealed off the sprawling fortress of Ulduar. Loken languished in regret within Ulduar's silent halls. Despite everything he had accomplished, he was ever fearful that the Pantheon or their appointed watcher, Algalon, would one day return to Azeroth. If that happened, they would discover Loken's horrific crimes and punish him. But in truth, the greatest threat was right beneath Loken's feet. No longer under the watchful eyes of Ulduar's jailers, 𝒂𝒅𝒏𝒂𝒍 began to stir, working to free itself from its impregnable prison. The Vanishing of Ra. As he dealt with the other keepers, Loken always expected that Ra would emerge from the southern reaches of Kalimdor to investigate the goings-on in Ulduar. But much to Loken's surprise, the High Keeper remained silent throughout these world-altering events. Overcome with curiosity, Loken dispatched a contingent of his army to the distant bastion of Uldum to investigate Ra's activities. These Titanforged agents never found the missing High Keeper, but they did learn from the local Mogu, Tol'vir, and Anubisats that Ra had mysteriously vanished. These meetings would have a lasting impact. In journeying south, Loken's forces had unwittingly spread the curse of flesh throughout many of Ra's faithful servants. Unbeknownst to Loken and the Titanforged, Ra had experienced a revelation, one so terrible that it had driven him into seclusion. When the Pantheon's power and memories had been infused in the Keepers, Ra had reeled in confusion much like his siblings. Over time, however, he had concluded that this event was more than just an anomaly. The influx of power was the last remnant of the Pantheon spirits. Ra struggled to accept the fact that the Pantheon had fallen. He extracted the lingering power of Aman'Thul from himself and carefully stored it in a mountain vault near what would become known as the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. There, the High Keeper hoped to preserve what little was left of his beloved Titan creator. Ra then retreated into the catacombs beneath the land to meditate on what he had learned. With the High Keeper gone, his loyal Titanforge developed new cultures, wholly distinct from those of their northern kin. Most of the Tol'vir congregated around Uldum, making the fortress their home. To the west, the Anubisats continued their sacred charge of watching over the prison of Cthulhu. Similarly, the Mogu remained in the east, guarding the Titanforged vaults and machineries buried beneath the earth. The Winterskorn War. For many ages after Loken's betrayal, the Titanforged who were exiled from Ulduar spread across northern Kalimdor. The lumbering giants gradually trickled into the mountains and seas around the region, disappearing from sight. The Earthen tunneled into the deep places of the world where they fought for dominance against a race of brutish and misshapen creatures known as Trogs. Many of the 𝒉𝒂𝒂 remained above ground, congregating into small clans. Some of these factions wandered the harsh northern landscape as nomads. Others established dwellings across the forested tundra of the region. A tenuous peace existed between these groups of Titanforged, but it could not last. In time, malign forces moved to assert dominion over the lands once protected by the Keepers. Among these forces were two of Loken's own creations, the brutish fire giants, Vulkan and Ignis. Vulkan and Ignis saw the storm peaks surrounding Ulduar as a land ripe for conquest. Yet, to seize the region, they required an army. To this end, the giants turned to the fierce Winterskorn clan of 𝒉𝒂𝒂. Though many 𝒉𝒂𝒂 were warlike in nature, most avoided direct confrontation with each other. The Winterskorn proved to be an exception. These 𒉉𝒂𝒂 had developed a culture of violence and aggression, due in large part to their belief that they would one day ascend to the halls of Valor. They thrived on conflict, whether it was between members of their own clan or with nearby groups of Titanforged. Vulkan and Ignis took control of the Winterskorn by force and stoked the fires of their battle lust. The giants fortified metal hides of the 𒉉𝒂𝒂 with enchanted armor. Vulkan and Ignis also forged powerful weapons designed to shatter the iron and stone skin of the other Titanforged. But just as this new army embarked on its great conquest, anomalies began to appear in the Winterskorn. The 𒉉𝒂𝒂's metallic skin became brittle and weak. They had begun showing the first symptoms of the curse of flesh. Despite this setback, Vulkan and Ignis had no intentions of abandoning their campaign. They also knew that they could no longer rely on Winterskorn alone to achieve victory. To strengthen the army, Vulkan and Ignis molded powerful molten golems and iron constructs of their own design. This massive Winterskorn army marched first against the good-natured Earthen, storming their underground lairs. The Earthen were utterly unprepared to face such an overwhelming and organized force. Entire caverns were massacred to the last living creature. A small group of survivors escaped the onslaught and sought the help of Tyr, Arcadis, and Iernia, who had thus far eluded Loken's wrath. Incensed by what they had learned, Tyr and his companions immediately journeyed to the Earthen's cavernous home to aid the beleaguered Titanforged. Tyr himself led the bravest of the Earthen in skirmishes with the Winterskorn, while Arcadis and Iernia constructed defenses to ward off future attacks. In time, the Earthen and their allies drove back the Winterskorn. Although their attempt to conquer the storm peaks had failed, Vulkan and Ignis did not concede defeat. They returned to the blistering forges and created a new army, one even greater than before. Not satisfied with golems and constructs alone, Vulkan and Ignis crafted enchanted snares with which to enslave entire flights of proto-dragons. These creatures would serve not as mounts, but as beasts of war. The giants outfitted their winged servants with fiery weapons to strike terror into the hearts of the Earthen. The Winterskorn's next brutal assault shattered the Earthen's defenses and drove them from their refuge. The Earthen scattered across the icy mountain passes, but they could not escape their foes. 𝒉𝒂𝒂 and golems hunted the Earthen on the ground, while proto-dragons assailed them from the skies. Even Tyr, Arcadis, and Iernia were forced to flee from the Winterskorn's fury. Knowing that he and his allies could not defeat the Winterskorn alone, Tyr called on the 5 dragon aspects for help. The noble aspects grew enraged upon seeing so many dead Titanforged. Their fury only deepened when they learned that proto-dragons had been enslaved. Without hesitation, the aspects took wing and unleashed their powers on the Winterskorn's iron ranks. Much as they had done in their fight against Galakrond, the aspects worked in unison to overwhelm the 𝑺𝒐𝒄𝒊𝒂𝒍 army. 𝑴𝒆💊𝒂𝒍 held the Winterskorn at bay with towering walls of enchanted fire. Malygos drained the magical essence that fueled the constructs and golems, rendering them useless. He also shattered the enchanted snares that bound the proto-dragons and set the beasts free. Neltharion raised mountains from the earth to corral and contain the 𝒉𝒂𝒂 and their giant masters. Lastly, Ysera and ☆Nozdormu combined their powers to create a spell that would bring a decisive end to conflict. Ysera and ☆Nozdormu enveloped the Winterskorn in a cloying mist that caused the Titanforged to fall asleep. These incapacitated creatures were then locked away in tomb cities across northern Kalimdor. They would not know the peaceful sleep of the Emerald Dream. Rather, they would languish in a timeless, unconscious slumber for thousands upon thousands of years. In the millennia to come, the curse of flesh would continue warping the sleeping Winterskorn 𝒉𝒂𝒂. When they eventually awoke, almost every one of them would discover that they had degenerated into mortal creatures of flesh and blood. The Discs of Norgannon. With the Winterskorn defeated, Keeper Tyr at long last turned his attention to Loken. So long as Ulduar remained sealed off and the Titanforged were divided, more conflicts would arise. Tyr grimly concluded that unless he took action against Loken, Azeroth would spiral into an abyss of war and chaos. But overthrowing Loken would require years of preparation. Tyr and his allies, Arcadis and Ironaya, concluded that they would first need to gather intelligence on Loken and his activities. To this end, they formulated a plan to steal the Discs of Norgannon from the heart of Ulduar. The relics had been recording everything that transpired on Azeroth, including Loken's betrayal. If there was any hope of undoing the damage caused by his schemes, it would be through the careful study of his actions. Having devised a ruse to claim the discs, Tyr traveled to the gates of Ulduar itself. There, he called on Loken to relinquish control of Ulduar for the good of Azeroth, threatening dire consequences if he refused. Loken emerged from the fortress to convince Tyr that less drastic measures would suffice. A fierce argument erupted between the two keepers, exactly as Tyr had hoped. While Loken was distracted, Arcadis and Ironaya infiltrated Ulduar and stole the Discs of Norgannon. Once they had secured the artifacts, Tyr and his companions escaped back into the icy crags and ridges of the Storm Peaks. They knew that Loken would soon hunt them down. Thus they prepared to journey south, where they hoped to find refuge from which to plan their next move. Before setting out, Tyr and his allies gathered great numbers of Titanforged who dwelled around Ulduar. Most of the surviving Earthen and many of the Mechanomes agreed to take part in the journey. Tyr, Arcadis, and Ironaya saw these Titanforged as innocent victims of Loken's treachery, and they promised to secure them a sanctuary before liberating Ulduar. The refugees traveled for many weeks, believing they had eluded Loken. When Loken learned that the Discs of Norgannon were missing, panic seized him. If Tyr and his allies presented the artifacts to Algalon or the Pantheon, Loken's life would be forfeit. Out of desperation, he turned to the only creatures he knew were powerful enough to stop the mighty Tyr and recover the discs: ancient Cathraxi monstrosities known as 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍 and 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑𝒂𝒐. 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒂𝒏 and 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑 had served as the Black Empire's most ruthless and cunning Cathraxi generals. Long ago, the Keepers had sealed them and many of the other Naraki away in an underground chamber alongside the Old Gods. With considerable effort, Loken extracted these Cathraxi tombs and roused 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒂𝒏 and 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑 to life. He ordered the colossal abominations to kill Tyr and all who followed him. Sensing the lingering touch of ☉ in Loken's mind, the two Cathraxi readily obeyed. Far to the south, in a tranquil and temperate glade, 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒏 and 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑 overtook the fleeing Keepers and their followers. Fearing for his allies' lives, Tyr ordered Arcadis and Ironaya to lead the rest of the Titanforge farther south. Meanwhile, he would hold off the Cathraxi for as long as possible. Only the barest shadow of Agrimar's old power lingered within Tyr's iron form, but the Titan's noble spirit had not flagged. Tyr would not retreat, not when the lives of innocents were at risk. As he grappled with the Cathraxi, torrents of both arcane and shadow energy ripped through the once peaceful glade. The violent struggle between the lone Keeper and the Cathraxi raged for 6 days and nights. Through it all, Tyr never gave ground, but neither did his foes. As fatigue set in, Tyr resolved to sacrifice himself to protect his friends. He unleashed all of his remaining power on the Cathraxi, expending his life force in a blinding explosion of arcane energy that shook the bones of the world. To the south, Arcadis and Ironaya watched as the eruption of magic flared across the horizon. After the volatile energy subsided, the two Titanforged ventured back to the site of the battle. There, within a giant crater crackling with arcane magic, they found the lifeless bodies of Tyr and 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑. Despite facing hopeless odds, the Keeper of Justice had nearly killed both Cathraxi. The survivor, 𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑, had only narrowly escaped Tyr's vengeful onslaught. The severely wounded Cathrax had blindly fled to the west. It would not be seen again for many thousands of years. In honor of her fallen comrade, Ironaya named the glades surrounding the crater Tyr's Fall, in which the 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑 tongue translated to Tyr's Fall. She and her followers buried Tyr and his foe where they lay. They placed Tyr's massive silver hand atop his final resting place as a memorial to his valiant sacrifice. Although all the refugees would carry on the story of Tyr's noble sacrifice, the 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑 in particular felt compelled to do something more. They were so moved by the Keeper's deeds that they decided to settle at the battle site and stand vigil over Tyr's grave until the end of their days. Arcadis and Ironaya honored the 𝒉𝒂𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒑's wishes to settle the land of Tyr's Fall. The Keeper and the Giantess continued south with the Earthen and Mechagnomes in tow. They eventually stopped at the easternmost Titan-forged vault on Kalimdor, Uldaman. Arcadis and Ironaya expanded the site, carving out new chambers to hold the Discs of Norgannon and vowing to protect history of Azeroth with their lives if need be. As the years passed, some of the Earthen exhibited signs of the Curse of Flesh. Many of these Titanforged feared that the effects would only worsen. They asked to be placed in hibernation until a cure could one day be found. Arcadis, promising to rouse them at some time in the future, agreed. He sealed his followers within Uldaman's vast subterranean vaults. The Mechagnomes, however, remained awake. Even though they knew the curse would one day overtake them as well, they heroically vowed to watch over Uldaman and maintain its wondrous machineries. In distant Ulduar, Loken became desperate upon learning that his 𝒂💐 had failed to kill his foes. He assumed that with the mighty Tyr dead, Arcadis and Ironaya would not attempt a direct assault upon Ulduar, but the Discs of Norgannon still posed a threat to him. Stealing or destroying the artifacts was no longer an option. Arcadis and Ironaya could easily seal off Uldaman from intruders. Instead, Loken attempted to replace the Discs of Norgannon with an archive of his own design, one that he dubbed the Tribunal of Ages. He adjusted the historical events contained in this new repository to his liking and expunged his sins from the record. Though he assumed he had been successful, his archive proved to be flawed. The histories stored within were warped even beyond Loken's understanding. Loken then took one final drastic measure to prevent retribution from Arcadis and Ironaya. He believed that his enemies would eventually summon the constellar Algalon. To stop this, Loken altered the Titan communication devices in Ulduar. This assured that no living creature would be able to contact Algalon. Only Loken's own death would draw the constellar to Azeroth. The Fallen Keeper assumed that his demise would come at the hands of Arcadis and Ironaya. If so, he was confident that Algalon would take his revenge for him by wiping out every living creature on Azeroth's surface. Children of Giants, the Rise of Humanity. With the Winterskorn asleep in their deep vaults and many of the earthen sealed within Uldaman, the remaining 𝑺𝒐𝒄𝒊𝒂𝒍 clans dominated the lands of northern Kalimdor. Over the course of eons, their disparate cultures flourished in many ways. They developed their own identities and customs as they spread across the unforgiving north. One of the mightiest clans to arise was the Dragonflights. Much like the Winterskorn, these 𝒉𝒂𝒂 found that their iron hides were gradually turning to flesh over time. Initially, the clan leaders sought to balance out their diminishing strengths by enslaving the ancient proto-dragons, just as the Winterskorn had done in previous centuries. But unlike the Winterskorn, the Dragonflights did not see the proto-dragons as mere beasts of war. They used the fearsome drakes as hunting companions, and they also rode them as battle mounts. Over time, these proto-dragons became an inseparable part of the clan's culture. They were also a necessary weapon